Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories from rural Japan, provided by my friend J Nightmare, who will be narrating one story in the middle of this video. If you liked these stories, be sure to check them out, links at the end and description. But for now it's time to get comfortable, grab your flashlights, and let the darkness take control. Many moons ago, when I was a college student, my friend had borrowed my camper van off his friend or relative. It was really sweet because it was big and could sleep 4 to 5 people. So we had this great camper van out of nowhere, but had nowhere to go. Me and my friend reached out to another friend of ours, and we as a group decided to pick some place and head on a road trip. Everyone was excited, and as soon as we got to talking, everyone was full of ideas for destinations, some more realistic than others. We trusted in our friend, who seemed to have a really good place in mind, and with that, our plans for our summer vacation were set in stone. The road trip was on. Well, our plan was to drive in the general direction of the place that our friend recommended. It was really fun since we didn't have to rely on hotels or anything like that. We could eat and drink in the van and be in peace. It was a cheap way to travel through Japan. We could go from place to place whenever we felt like it. To us young university students, it was a real sense of freedom that we hadn't experienced before. We were going further into the mountains through the windy mountain passes, taking in the scenery, the luscious green forests and stuff. Because we had a drink the night before, the second or third night into our mini expedition we set off late. We didn't decide where to stop for the night. The following took place around 10 p.m. We wanted to go and detox in the hot springs, and we heard of one out in the middle of nowhere. It would be the perfect way to end our little trip. The roads were getting more and more twisty and winding. It felt like every couple of minutes my pal was taking a hairpin corner. The streetlights were few and far between into the mountains, and my friend was driving, and my only other friend was laying down somewhere in the back. We were chugging along the dark road when suddenly the car's headlights illuminate 2 figures in the middle of it. They were walking into traffic, a parent and child. Why the hell were they way out here in the middle of the night? I'll never forget them, and you'll understand why soon enough. There was a middle-aged woman holding a young boy's hand. The woman was wearing a cardigan, and the small boy looked to be about 2 to 3 years old. We had to swerve around them. Thankfully, we weren't going very fast, but fast enough for it to be kind of a close call. To be honest with you, red flags at this point, you know what I mean? What the hell was going on here? Whatever, it doesn't seem good, I thought to myself. Pretty sure my friend who was driving felt exactly the same thing I did. He spoke up and said something to me. Weird time of night to be taking your kid for a walk. Huh? Yes, true. Maybe they live nearby though. But neither of us had seen any houses nor streetlights for ages. We didn't see much of anything out there, to be honest. The sat-nav didn't work either, but it worked a little in patches. I'd been watching it every now and then, and noticed the landmark stuff like restaurants and grocery markers weren't there. It was literally just a mountain, and we were going to be on it until we got off it. There was no good reason for these people to be heading in this direction, in my opinion, and the sat-nav's opinion. It was weird. We carried on going, and eventually reached the hot spring place, which had an RV park. It wasn't busy. There were a few cars and vans there, but that wasn't what struck us as odd. People were clamoring. They were up in arms in the parking lot. Even though it was late, there were loads of people walking around the premises shining flashlights. Everyone seemed to be frantically looking for something. As we pulled the camper van to a stop, 2 women came running towards us. They said a child had gone missing. A 2-year-old boy had disappeared. Apparently his parents took their eye off him for a split second, and in that short window he had vanished. My friend and I turned to each other, and something simultaneously clicked in our heads. The middle-aged woman and the child we had seen walking in traffic. We got to the traumatized parents to look over the footage of the dash cam. The mother of the missing child was distraught when she confirmed that the little boy was her son. She begged us to take her there. We agreed, of course, and they jumped in the van. woke up the friend who was asleep in the back and had no idea what the hell was going on, and headed back the way we came. Some of the others from the parking lot followed on behind in their cars. Our friend in the back was asking loads of questions, but there was no time to answer him. We were all flustered. We drove down the winding roads, and things were not looking good. There was no sign of the boy or the abductor. When all hope appeared to be lost, my headlights fell on a small figure crouching by the guardrail at the side of the road. It was the missing boy. We hit the brakes and the boy's parents ran to him. He was visibly distressed. He wailed and wailed. His parents asked him what happened, and he said that he was brought to this spot and told to wait by the woman who took him from the hot spring spa. She went off through a gap in the bush and presumably would be back soon. It was so stressful, both parents and child were crying of relief and fear. I've never seen anything like it before. Soon the police arrived and we went back to the spa. The police requested the dashcam footage and we happily provided it. They were treating the case as if it were an attempted kidnap, which it was. We needed to get the dashcam memory stick thing back, so the police took our details and the local cops kept us up to date with the case when they called us to say that we could have the memory stick back. The woman who took the boy wasn't caught. They had nothing to go on, no evidence, no motive, and no idea where she was going to take the child or where she'd come from. I've wondered myself what the motive was. Perhaps she just meant to lead the boy off and abandon him. Maybe she was just never going to come back as she intended to leave the kid by the side of the road. Such abandonment is kind of an ancient custom in some of the rural mountainous areas of Japan. Maybe she was doing that for some unknown reason. I have no idea. Maybe she was going to come back for him, or take him to some other place. But regardless of the explanation, the whole thing was certainly malicious. I'm just glad that we were suspicious about the situation when we saw the woman and child, and lucky enough to encounter them before reaching the hot springs where he'd been taken. The image on the dashcam of the woman leading the boy away is one that will live with me forever. She was smiling a really big smile. So disturbing. I don't think I'll ever forget it. I went camping with 6 friends last summer. We hired a small campsite in the mountains. It was a really great time actually. We set off fireworks and had a barbecue. It was perfect. There is something so peaceful about sitting and watching a roaring bonfire, isn't there? By midnight, everyone was pretty much tuckered out, and we decided that it might be time to hit the hay. We all settled in for the night, and I don't know if I was the first to hear it, but I'm confident that before the night was out, we all heard it. There was a low kind of moaning or groaning sound coming from somewhere deep in the woods. If I had to put an age on it, I would say middle-aged, and I would say the owner of that voice was likely a woman. At points I did wonder if it was an animal, but there was something so human-like to that voice, it convinced me that it couldn't be from an animal. Clearly human. There was a certain sadness to the quality and tonality of the voice. It was rather unnerving. It was weird because we were pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't see any other campers in the area that we hired. I remembered gathering firewood and thinking, well, we're the only ones out here. There weren't any houses or cabins nearby. I didn't know who could be out here making these weird noises in the middle of the night. The voice, the moaning and groaning voice, only lasted for about 10 minutes, before it just sort of ended. In the morning, my friends and I spoke about what we had heard. We later ran into another group around the campsite, and we asked if they had heard the creepy wailing noise. They said they had. These guys were older than us, and it looked like this wasn't their first camping trip. When we spoke to them, they confirmed they were regulars to this particular campsite. We mentioned the screaming sound we had heard the night before, and they smiled at one another with a knowing glance and told us the following. From this point, it's kind of like an urban legend. It's up to you how much faith you put into our claims, but since you asked, I guess you want to know. This here used to be a site for kids' camps, summer camps. It isn't that way anymore, as you can tell. The reason for that was a disappearance. It happened on an all-girls school summer camping trip. They were learning about forestry and nature. Used to have an awful lot of camping trips around here, and something changed after that night though. It was as if the soil went sour or something. So the teachers were all up in arms because a student went missing. They turned desperate as the minutes crawled by. But this story doesn't have a happy ending. They found her all right, hanging from a tree limb. The rumors were that the poor girl was relentlessly bullied. If the teachers didn't notice the student was missing for a few hours, I doubt they noticed any kind of bullying. The teacher who found her apparently quit shortly after. She couldn't cope with the guilt or the shock, and during the search, she was one of the ones who was most vocal. She was the one calling out her student's name. She was the one who couldn't bear the shock of letting her students down. She took the same way out as her students, sadly. So, we all came to the conclusion that the groaning and moaning sound perhaps isn't the voice of the student at all, but of the guilt-ridden teacher, still searching for her student, bound to the earth by the guilt she feels. We all trembled. I did wonder if it was all a ploy to make sure noisy young men with fireworks didn't return to their tranquil campsite sometime later, but that moaning sound was so real and so creepy. When I was young, it took about half an hour by bike to get to school. There was a bus, but the bus cost money, and I didn't want to ask my parents for bus money all the time. Money was kind of taboo subject in our family back then, so I was happy to go on the bike. The route to school was simple enough. It was north to head to the school and south to go home. There was a river flowing halfway through the route from east to west. There were two routes you could choose though. The first route goes alongside the river on the north side, but there is a national highway on that side, so there's a lot of traffic even at night. It's a little dangerous. The other route was on the other side of the river, the opposite side of the highway. This way was a lot more peaceful. There were only a few houses out there. You also had the nicer, scenic views. You could see the mountains, countrysides, fields, and of course the dense forest. If you take this route at night, it's really unlikely that you will pass by car, a bike, person, or anyone. There were rumors that route, some people said ghosts appeared on it. There were literally no streetlights. Most of the students at my school avoided the route on the way home. Not me though. I had ridden through the forest on that side with my dad since I was a kid. I knew the way so well that when I came home late, I would turn the lights off on my bike and rely solely on the moonlight to guide me. It was relaxing. I would listen to the sound of the river. There was a really cool part of the woods where the branches of trees had created this kind of natural arch. It looked like right out of a storybook and I loved it. On the night that this experience took place, I was heading home late from school. I took part in a lot of club activities, so it wasn't uncommon to be home late. It was already past 9 p.m, and I had stayed late to speak to friends. Someone said that a typhoon was coming. We were all hoping that our school would be closed tomorrow, so we didn't mind staying a little late if we weren't going to hang out tomorrow. The warm breeze was strong, so I decided to head home before the weather turned, and I chose my usual route home through the forest just in case it rained. The clouds were looking low and grey. My bike had a kinetic energy-powered light bulb, so if I hit a switch it would just make the pedaling a little harder, but it would provide light. I hit the switch, but the light didn't come on. I guess the bulb had burst. This is just what I needed, so I just pressed on and hurried home before it rained. It was so dark out, but my eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness, and I was able to keep going with confidence along the roads. But I had to slow as I entered the forest. As I entered, I felt something was different. I felt a little frightened of the woods that night, but I told myself I didn't need to be scared. The forest is creepy at night, but it's the hole in the ears that lets the fear in the absence of light. And the weather didn't help. I just pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind and entered the woods. The headwinds grew stronger as I passed through, which made pedaling harder. I just had to get home though. All of a sudden there was a weird smell which was accompanied with the wind. It reeked. Then I thought I could see something popping up and down out of the darkness ahead. I stared forward, puzzled, and that was when I felt something grab my left shoulder. I'd never been scared of the forest, but that night changed everything. I pedaled as fast as I could, making a voiceless scream against the wind. My heart was racing. I was terrified. I put some distance between myself and where I left the hand on my shoulder and thought to myself, whoa, I finally had a paranormal experience. Hope that's the end of it. I kept riding. I was powered by adrenaline. I swear I heard something behind me. I didn't have the courage to look behind though. There was even less visibility than before. I hated it. Thankfully, the path had widened and was largely flat. For some reason, I shouted the name of my dog, and then I pedaled noticeably faster. I got through the forest and I began to see the welcome sight of the neighboring houses and the branches in the trees. I still didn't have the courage to look back and check to see if anything was following me. When I came out of the woods, there was a convenience store just on the other side of the bridge. I chose that point to look behind me, and there was nothing chasing me. I felt my heart rate slow. I locked my bike up outside the convenience store and headed in, and I have never been so happy to hear the sound of the entry bell in my life. I got even happier when I saw that a couple of friends were standing by the magazine rack. They laughed and said that I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I chuckled with them. I was too embarrassed to tell them what happened. One of them looked at my shoulder with a grimace, then asked, "Mate, what happened to your shoulder? It's filthy." The fear came rushing back to me. I looked at my shoulder, and there were some disgusting stains there. Immediately, I unbuttoned my shirt and hurled it in the trash. My friends all laughed and asked what the hell I was doing. I just got on my bike and left. When I got home, my mum asked me about what happened and why I wasn't wearing my goddamn shirt. I said that I just forgot it at school. Dinner was ready for me and I was hungry, chowed it down, and was eating when clarity and rationality arrived. And I came to the conclusion that perhaps something from above in the trees had fallen, blown by the wind, and landed on my shoulder. Perhaps it wasn't a paranormal experience. With that in mind, I felt kind of embarrassed about how I acted at the convenience store. I was a little scared, so I got my big sister and the dog to stay in my room that night. Unfortunately, school wasn't closed the next day. The typhoon never hit our area, so I had to go to school. Great. However, thanks to my canine best friend, I was able to sleep well, and when I woke up, I started to think that I had created a scene out of nothing. The embarrassment hadn't faded. I had breakfast with the family, grabbed my umbrella and went to school. I chose the other route to go to school that morning. I took a look at the forest when I got to the bridge, and it didn't look that daunting, but I still didn't want to go in there. On that day during lunch, I heard a story. I heard something that would justify my fears out there in the deep dark woods. I wasn't the only one who had an encounter in the forest. There was a boy at school who was delivering newspapers. He was a few years older than me and my friend group, but my sister knew him. His job was to deliver newspapers in our area, and a small village just beyond the edge of the forest. So like me, he used the forest to go to and from his newspaper route. He would make these deliveries early, like really early. He was out on his bike at 5:30 a.m. at the crack of dawn. He would head through the woods as usual and stopped still in his tracks when he saw a body swinging in the morning breeze, the body's neck hanging crooked from a tree limb. This is where mine and his stories crossed paths. I don't think I was grabbed on the shoulder that night. No, I think it was the clatter of some dangling foot that brushed my shoulder. I don't know if the individual who chose to take their life could have been saved at that point, but there is one thing I do know. Had the light on my bicycle worked, I might have been able to do something to save them if it wasn't too late. I think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. If the light had been working, maybe things would have been different. And these days, I don't go into the forest anymore. I have only really had one scary experience worth sharing. When I was a student, I used to go camping by myself regularly. At one point, I was camping almost every weekend. I used to camp from Friday to Sunday out in the elements. I didn't mind where. I camped in cornfields and in the shade of mountains. With no real friends at college, I guess I was trying to suppress my loneliness by exploring nature. On the night that this took place, I got on the train and headed out with no real direction in mind. I didn't bring a map and didn't research where I was going to be camping. I was just winging it. I knew that there would be mountains where I was heading, so I figured I would easily find somewhere to camp. I got off the train and set off into the wilderness and eventually found a nice area between two mountains. It looked like a pretty safe place, so that's where I set up my camp for the night. I made a campfire dinner and then retreated into my tent to read a little. Before I knew it, it was almost midnight. It was a quiet night. There was a breeze, but it wasn't that cold despite being fall. I was comfortable in my tent. Well, that was until I heard the zipper at the front of the tent unzip. I panicked, but I tried to think logically at first. Was I trespassing on private property? Was someone here to move me on? Or could something worse be happening? I was worried that I was in danger. The tent flap was fully unzipped in a matter of moments, and then I saw a figure. A man was out there. He leaned his head into the tent, and I saw a face. It was just some old man. He looked very ordinary, the kind of guy you'd walk past in the street and hardly notice. As he leaned into my tent, he asked, "Are you traveling through here?" I couldn't wrap my head around what he was asking. I just shook my head from side to side to indicate no, and with that, the old guy zipped up the front flap and left. I was confused and pretty freaked out. I didn't spot a house in the area, and I think the closest one I saw was nearly a mile away. What the hell was this old guy doing out in the mountains so late? I started to wonder if I'd seen a ghost or something, but I knew deep down that I had seen a real person. But the absurdity of the situation had me questioning everything. Well, I guess that sleep was off the agenda for the night. I mean, there would be no possible way I was going to sleep with a guy out there. He was comfortable enough to open my tent, so what else was this guy capable of doing? I didn't know if he was a psycho, or if he was armed, or if he was a thief. I mean, he didn't look like any of those things, but I guess it's possible that he could have been all three. I couldn't sleep with that on my mind. While I was mulling over all of that, I heard the sound of the zipper being pulled again. The front flap opened, and this time a completely different guy stuck his head through the opening of the tent. He asked me more or less the same question. "Are you on a trip or vacation or something?" I shook my head to indicate no again. I didn't know how to answer this guy, and I wanted to give a similar answer to the first one I gave. I didn't know what they were testing. There had to be a point to their line of questioning. When he heard my response, he zipped up the tent again and seemingly walked off somewhere. The second guy was younger. He was middle-aged, again, a very ordinary-looking chap. I didn't know if I was being targeted or if this was the beginning of some kind of game, and I didn't plan on sticking around to find out, so I decided to pick up my things as fast as I could. I was worried though. I knew it was dark out there. There was no moon out that night, and you know how dark it can get in the mountains and the woods, right? I didn't see either of those guys carrying flashlights. It just kept getting weirder and weirder. I needed to plan my way out. I honestly spent close to 20 minutes imagining what kind of scenarios would happen when I set foot out my tent. I knew I wouldn't be able to see where those guys were, and they could come at me from any angle. I imagined a kitchen knife being plunged into my back. I had no choice though. I mean, I had to get out of the tent. I couldn't just sit there and wait for their first move, so with my heart racing, I decided to step out. I equipped myself with my mag light for self-defense, and slowly went out, but couldn't see anyone there. I thought that might be my chance to get all my stuff packed up and get the hell out of there. I was making promises with all the known gods that if I got out of there safely, this would be the last time I went on a solo camping trip. I was shoving things into my bag, but I stopped in my tracks when I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. and I looked up to see these two men's silhouettes. I just carried on with packing my stuff up, but then one of the men spoke. "You going home? It's the middle of the night." This time I replied and said something along the lines of, "Yeah, urgent call. I have to go." "We didn't hear a phone ring," one of them replied. I naturally turned to face them at this point. They knew I was lying. I shone my flashlight at them and saw that they were wearing dark robes. They had masks perched on top of their heads, as if they had just pulled them off their faces. There was something very disturbing going on out here. They stood there and watched me frantically get my stuff together. A thought came into my mind that really scared me. It was like my internal voice said to me, it was a short life. I really thought this could be the end. I thought that they were about to attack me. But they didn't do anything though. They just observed. I got my things and bolted. I heard something weird as I was running. I knew there were more people out in the mountains that night. I could tell there were. Footsteps, branches snapping, and I swear I heard someone laughing. But most chillingly of all, I heard what sounded like a chorus of voices begin to murmur something. I tripped and stumbled, and by the time I got to the foot of the mountain I was covered in unseen cuts and bruises. I spent the rest of the night at the train station and did not get any sleep. As soon as the first train arrived, I joined the morning commuters and got out of there. I must have looked like a wreck. I was getting some strange looks. I kept my promise. That was the last time I would go camping alone. It was a really terrifying experience. I don't know what those people were wearing robes and masks for out in the woods, and I don't want to find out. I have the feeling that I got away from something that night. Maybe it was down to the way I answered the questions they asked. Maybe they thought I was a local. I don't know. But if I told them I was on a trip and that I wasn't from the area, maybe I wouldn't be sharing this story with you today. Oh, and for those of you interested, it was in Gifu, Japan. Whenever my sister asked me to babysit my niece, I used to take her out. She really loved the mountains, the forest, especially the winding roads. We saw a sign which said, driving course. I guessed at the time, there was an event of these that would be coming up. So I figured that since it was a quiet kind of evening, I could take my niece along the course. It was open to the public and I wasn't trespassing or anything. We were having a great time chatting and driving through the mountain roads, seeing all sorts of stuff along the way like hot springs and nocturnal wildlife. We stopped at a restaurant along the way. It was a really nice change of pace. I work in an office and rarely get to see much of nature on my time off, so I was happy that my niece convinced me to take her on a ride. After eating, we both wanted to keep on going through the driving course. It was so much fun. I was picking up a little speed, and we were both having a great time, when my niece spotted a little dirt road off the side of the mountain pass and pleaded with me to take her down there. It was getting a little late, but I couldn't resist giving in to her demands. I told her that after we'd had a little look we would turn right back, and she agreed. It turned out that going off-road was an awful idea. We had got about 200 meters down the dirt road when I hit something with my front right tire. I don't know what the hell I did to the car, bent the axle or something. It was a pretty harrowing experience to realize that I was in trouble and responsible for my niece. We were both shaken up. We hit a rock or something big enough for it to cut the engine. To be honest, I'm surprised the airbags didn't go off. I was the adult and had to be calm, but honestly I was so nervous. I'm a woman, and, well, it was just me and my niece out in the middle of the dark, mountainous woods, with each passing moment, it getting darker and darker. I got my phone from my purse and went to dial my roadside rescue service, but I had no signal. I started to get vibes from horror films I watched as a teen, but I knew I had to push my fear aside for the sake of my niece. I didn't know what to do. There was no way I would be able to leave my niece in the car and walk down the mountain to the nearest building, which I guess would have been the restaurant. For some reason my niece wasn't very frightened by the situation. Perhaps she felt a little guilty in hindsight. She didn't freak out or start crying. She handled the situation pretty maturely, and I was very grateful for that. I told her that we had a few options. We could wait there, lock the doors, and then, when there was a bit more light, I could go off, or try and get some signal to make a call, and that would mean leaving her in the car. She didn't want to be left alone in the dark. I could have guessed that much. I tried starting the engine, but of course had no luck. It seemed as if we were in a really bad area when the wind whistled through the trees, and it frightened me. There are wild things in the woods, and they had the cover of darkness on their side. We sat there for a while chatting, trying to lighten the tension, and then my niece started to yawn. I checked my phone to see what time it was, and was shocked to see that I somehow had a bar of signal. I called roadside rescue instantly. The phone held its signal long enough for me to ask for help. I was told to just sit tight and lock the doors and wait for the recovery vehicle to arrive. I guess we both ate quite a lot at the all-you-can-eat place earlier, and I was feeling quite drowsy too. I closed my eyes for a while. I must have snoozed, because when I looked over at my niece I saw she was fast asleep. It was colder and darker when I woke up. There were new rustling sounds in the darkness, and the wind was blowing the leaves from the trees. I was frightened. That's when I heard a horrible noise. It sounded like a voice. It was distant but sounded like it was getting closer, and I couldn't really tell how far away it was. This indescribable wail crossed with a screech was approaching, I knew that much. I thought that it could be my imagination making things more frightening than they were. My mother always said that it was the hole in the ear that lets the fear in, and the absence of light. I told myself that if I just closed my eyes, whatever was frightening me would pass. The sound stopped. It sounded like it stopped right beside the car. A few agonizing seconds crawled by, and I realized that I couldn't convince myself that it was my mind playing tricks on me any longer, and I felt as if there was a very real threat outside the driver's side door. I slowly opened my eyes and turned my head to face the window, and I saw nothing but a dark figure there. It was like there was something completely covered in black pressed up against the window. I don't know how to describe it better. It was a solid black mass. I lost it when I saw that. I instinctively released the handbrake and tried to start the engine. To my surprise, it spluttered to life. I hit reverse and saw the thing in the light of my headlights. It looked like a person wearing a black cloak. My niece woke up, but thankfully I don't think she saw it. If she did, she never mentioned it. I managed to reverse back to the start of the dirt road and waited there for roadside rescue to arrive. When we were towed from the woods back to a light source, I looked to the driver's side window, and there were handprints and smudges of what looked like a face on the glass. It really frightened me, and I'm so glad I didn't leave my niece in the car to search for signal. I have no clue what that thing wanted, but I guess that it wouldn't have been anything remotely positive. I heard this from a friend of mine who used to be in the Japanese Self-Defense Force. It's essentially their army and navy. The reason it's called Defense Force is due to the surrender treaty during World War II. Japan are not allowed to have military as such, but are allowed to have the means to protect themselves, hence the name Self-Defense Force. There is an exercise that they do. I'm not sure if I should be saying this, but I heard it from a friend a while back that might not even be active exercise anymore. Apparently, this exercise stimulates what it would be like to be in the middle of war. The exercise would take place up in the mountains, and it would last for 3 or 4 nights. It sounded pretty intense. They would take turns on guard and sleep in shifts. During that time, there were these kind of bases dug into the mountains. You know, these spaces designed for soldiers to hide in, where they would be able to hide from the elements, keep watch and take breaks. These hides were very well camouflaged. It was very authentic despite being a drill. Well, one day during fall, a training exercise was set up. 2 soldiers in training were stationed outside in the elements to keep watch. However, come the middle of the night, the 2 soldiers in training would abandon their posts. They ran into one of the hides, speaking loudly, and this caught the attention of their supervisor. Their supervisor yelled at them for abandoning their post and demanded an explanation. The soldiers in training could only tell their supervisor that they saw something. They both looked pale and were said to be trembling. The supervisor demanded an answer, and he was told by the pair of them that they had seen a ghost. The other soldiers in the hide listened to the story with great interest, and it went something like this. The two guys on guard said that everything was going pretty smoothly. They had heard a rustling sound ahead of them that made them cautious. At first they thought that the noise was being made by an animal, but when they really paid attention to the sound, they realized it was the sound of footfalls. It sounded like someone was walking around. It was several yards away and it was dark, but it wasn't pitch black. There was enough natural light out to make shadows and shapes out. They said they saw a dark silhouette of a human ahead of them, and during the exercise, capturing the other team members was encouraged, so the two of them at their post decided to try and sneak up on the owner of the silhouette in an attempt to capture them. They snuck out and split up to approach their target from either side, and held their breaths as they crept up. They closed the distance between them and the silhouette to about 4 yards, and then shouted out at their target. They shouted, "If you make any sudden moves, you will be shot," cocked their guns and aimed at their target. The silhouette just stood there silently without moving, but there was no response. There were no lights in the area, so one of them took out their flashlight while the other kept their gun aimed. The flashlight was pointed at the silhouette and then turned on, only to reveal that no one was there. Whoever had been there was gone. That was what caused the men to leave their posts and come back to hide. Upon hearing this, the supervisor responded with the following: "Dawn is almost here. Face your fear, boys, and return to the post. That's an order." They tried their best to persuade the supervisor to allow them to hide or even transfer them to a different post, but he could not be swayed. A debate turned into a heated argument where threats were exchanged, but eventually the soldiers reluctantly left the hide and returned to their posts, where they were said to be shaking with fear. There have been rumors of people taking their lives in the dormitories of the barracks. Some said that a soldier was once accidentally shot with a live round right there in the training area. So who knows, maybe there might be something substantial to their claims. My friend is convinced that the two who abandoned their posts saw an apparition out there in the cold of fall that night.
This happened when I was little. I think I was in the 2nd grade of elementary school at the time. My mother died when I was very young, so I was raised by my father. I guess that growing up in a household like that made me kind of introverted. When I was in the 1st year of elementary school, I was bullied relentlessly. So much so that I refused to go to school. If I was at school, I would do everything I could to try to escape. I hated it. My behavior was bad enough to get me sent to live with my mother's side of the family, way out in the countryside. I was living with my grandparents. I really hated the countryside. It was hard to believe that such a place so boring could even exist in the modern world. I felt like it was from another time period. Like, there weren't many kids my age in the area. I think there were only a couple of high school students. It was alright though, since I already got used to my own company. I loved insects back then. I would just go out and go bug catching. I guess that was one good point of living in the countryside. There was an abundance of bugs to hunt for. I guess I spent about half a year in the countryside living like this, and then things changed when I met a woman. She was probably in her late 20s or early 30s. She had long dark hair, and she was beautiful. "Hey, are you on holiday or something? I don't think I've seen you here before," she said. I was kind of shocked because I didn't expect her to speak to me. I noticed that she was gazing at my little plastic insect collecting cage. "Whoa, you got so many, can I take a look?" she called out to me. Well, at that age, talking about insects was pretty much my favorite topic, so I couldn't believe my luck when she said that. I really enjoyed telling her everything I knew about the bugs that I had. She was really complimentary and was hanging on my every word. I had never had another person outside of my family praise me like that before. It was just the best feeling ever. So, from that day forward, I wanted to see her all the time and talk with her about bugs and stuff. She wanted to spend time with me too. We were looking for bugs in a field and even a river. It was great. We would always agree to meet by a stone Jizo monument near the river. I would often speak to my grandfather about her, and he always said that it was someone's daughter in the village and she wouldn't be around long, and to leave them alone and to not annoy them. He didn't understand that we were friends. I didn't care. It was just so great to find a friend in such a depopulated area. She was really nice, but she never spoke about herself much. Whenever I told her anything, she would be so happy to hear it. And I told her everything. How I was bullied and how I didn't have a mum, etc. Whenever I complained about something, she had a sympathetic ear. I thought of her as a mother, to be completely honest with you. I even told her that, and she looked very sad for a second, and then she smiled. Sadly, shortly after this, I got sick. At first I thought it was just a cold, and since I didn't have a fever or anything like that, I thought I was well enough to go out and play. I hated not being able to see her, and even when I was sick, I would go down to the usual meeting place to wait for her. But as my illness got worse and worse, my grandpa noticed. I was told to rest at home, but it didn't help at all. Even when I was forced to rest in bed, I wouldn't stop asking about her. I really wanted to see her. I kept on and on about her so much that my grandpa phoned her family home to ask for her. I remember thinking that Grandpa was off of the phone very quickly. He came back into my bedroom with a concerned look on his face. "Hey, you. Who you been playing with? Because it sure ain't the woman I thought. She didn't come back this summer. Do you even know the name of the woman you've been going around with? What kind of person have you been seeing?" I really panicked. I hated being cornered and told off. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't remember her name, and in fact, we didn't even ask each other our names. We had so many other fun things to talk about. Well, Grandpa couldn't believe that, and he demanded to know what she looked like, so I did my best to describe her appearance. Once I did, Grandpa stormed out of the room and back towards the phone. I wondered what the hell the problem was, but now I'm older I realize why he was concerned. We lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and we didn't really get too many strangers in town. Everyone knew one another and one another's business. By the end of the night, no one had a clue who that woman was, and I think my grandparents started to suspect that she might not have ever existed. They told me to stop going to meet her, and because I was really ill at the time and I could barely move from the bed, I had little other choice. After a while, I got a little better, and I was allowed to play outside my grandparents' house. I always kept an eye out for my friend, even though I knew I would be in so much trouble if I was seen with her. I missed her. A while passed, and I ended up playing in the back garden of my grandparents' home. And then, when I realized they weren't paying attention to where I was anymore, I went into the field behind the back garden. There was a hole in the fence, and I could sneak into the field and back out to the garden pretty easily. The field had a lot more places to search for bugs, and because I got better, I returned to bug hunting since there wasn't really that much else to do. I was engrossed in looking under the leaves of a small shrub when I heard someone call my name. It wasn't either of my grandparents. It was my friend. She was back. I was so happy that she came to go bug hunting with me. I was too overjoyed to ask her any of the things my grandpa asked me all those months ago. I was just a kid. I saw that my grandparents spotted me from the window, and I waved at them, and they waved back. Everything was all right again in my little world, it seemed. At dinner time, I said to my grandpa, "Hey, you saw us bug hunting today, right? Why didn't you come say hello to her?" My grandparents stopped eating and looked at me. "You were playing alone, unless she went off somewhere far, and you know you're not supposed to do that, but I didn't see you with no her." Their looks of concern didn't fade, and my grandpa went to the phone again, but this time to call my father. He came back and uttered the most heartbreaking sentence I've ever heard. "Look, I'm really sorry, but you're gonna have to go back to your dad." My heart sunk. So I was being sent away. I guess that's because they thought I was imagining some woman, or... I really didn't know. I had about a week to think of all the reasons why I was being sent away. And during that time, I wasn't even allowed to go outside. I missed my friends so much, and I hated being indoors after being sick all that time. I was really sad. I sat on the porch of my grandparents' home waiting for my dad to come and take me away. I remember just crying my eyes out and demanding to be there on that porch because I just wanted to see her one last time. And then, there she was. She appeared out of nowhere. She crouched down and spoke to me. "What's the matter?" Choking on the lump in my throat and fighting back the tears welling in my eyes, I told her that I had to go. "Oh no, don't cry. It's a good thing. I'll be supporting you, just from a distance." I asked her if I would ever see her again, and she looked down and shook her head. My heart ached. It was the first friend I made in my life. The first person who ever wanted to talk to me for me being me. She waved goodbye to me with this big smile and walked on out of the garden and out of my life. After that, I went home and back to school, and I didn't get bullied again. I felt so much better, like a weight had been lifted. I felt like I was enjoying life for the first time. I understood the beauty of the word normal, and I felt like I could be described as it. After I went away, we didn't get to go back that often. And with age came wisdom, and I learned a few things about the area I used to play in. That particular area had been kind of infamous in the past for disappearances, especially child disappearances. Some old texts and rumors say that kids who don't make a whole lot of friends were the ones to disappear, you know, the loners. I even heard that some of the kids before they disappeared were sick for a bunch of days, for some unknown reason. But given all that, I don't care. I never saw her again, and I never knew who she was. But she's so important to me, though. She might have been a ghost. She might have wanted to spirit me away. She might have been protecting me from being spirited away. She might have been an everyday person, as real as you or I. I don't know. It's a little scary now I'm older and I think back on it, but when I was younger, I felt nothing but love for her. She was like the mother I never had and I always wanted. This happened a couple of dozen years ago, but I'll never forget it. Thanks for listening.
This happened when I was in the 4th year of elementary school. I joined a local youth volunteer group. Just to give you some background on what that entailed, it was a program led by university students. Basically, we would volunteer to clean up litter, do some gardening, stuff like that to help out the community. It wasn't all work though. We got some really great camping trips because of our efforts, and I enjoyed it. This experience took place during that year's summer vacation. We were set to be camping out by an abandoned forestry school deep out in the mountains. I don't remember all that well since I was really young at the time, so some details are going to be either missing or a little sparse. There was a river that flowed near the abandoned school, and we, the elementary students, were having a lot of fun playing and swimming in it. The river flowed upstream, and there were lots of large rocks and stones on the riverbed. Some were just jutting out of the water too. Although the current was pretty strong, we were still able to swim there. We didn't really care about distance swimming. We were just paddling around and having a great time. The water was pretty deep, so some of us were looking for a place to dive in. I also realized at that point it would be possible to swim under a little bridge they had over the river. I don't know if we were supposed to be allowed to do all that, but we did. The university students didn't stop us. I doubt that kind of thing would be allowed nowadays though. My neighbor joined our camping trip, Ada. Ada wasn't the quickest learner. That was about as gently as I can put it. Because she was a bit slow, she was bullied by other students. When I was diving in the river, I saw that Ada was struggling to keep her head above the water level. I dove in, and I was underwater thinking she looks like she's struggling because she probably hasn't swam much before. Classic Ada. I might have thought something a bit meaner, but that's neither here nor there. When I came up, I noticed that she really was struggling, and it looked like she was on the verge of drowning. I yelled to my campmates on the shore for help, but none of them were reacting quickly enough. While I was about to yell louder, I felt something clasp against my leg. Ada, who was drowning, had grabbed hold of my leg and was pulling me down with her. She was a lot stronger than I thought she would be. I guess fear for one's life can bring out sudden hidden strength to the individual. I was desperately trying to get to the surface, and Ada's hand tightened its grip around my ankle. I even felt her long hair getting tangled around my leg between my toes. It was gross. I felt so breathless. I felt as though I was going to die. I was completely in panic mode. I had no time to think of her. It didn't even enter my mind. I could only think of my own survival. Although I knew it would be painful to decide to open my eyes and look down, I wasn't ready for what I saw. I didn't see an elementary school student grabbing hold of my ankle. I saw a bone-white pale woman grabbing onto me. Her dark hair swayed in the water like seaweed. I remember thinking that very clearly because I thought straight after that I wasn't in the sea, I was in the river. That was just a mad thought. I could see her other pale hand reach out and attempt to grab my other ankle. If this woman got a hold of my other ankle, I knew I would be done for. A lot happened in the space of a few seconds, but the thought that jumped to my forefront was, that's not Ada. I felt a fear I haven't had the displeasure of feeling again. A feeling of pure disgusting fear. A fear so terrible it was almost incomprehensible. Fight or flight. I kicked the woman as hard as I could with my bare foot. Eventually I felt her grip loosen, and I used the last of my strength to dart to the surface and scramble to the shore. When I emerged from the river, everyone was looking at me. I saw Ada, and when I stopped spluttering and caught my breath, I yelled at her, "Weren't you drowning just now?" She didn't say anything, but all the other students almost in unison told me that I was the only one drowning. No one else was anywhere near me. If I hadn't kicked that pale woman so hard when I did, I might have not made it out of the river. When I think about how close I was to being dragged down to the depths by that woman, it still sends a shiver down my spine. I'm not sure who she was, but I believe her to be otherworldly. I think she was some kind of spirit yokai or cryptid that preys on the victims in the river. Perhaps she was a victim herself. It was one camping experience I don't think I'll ever forget. This happened about 20 years ago, but I think about it every now and then. When it happened all those years ago, I was a schoolboy. I had just gotten a camera for my birthday, and I was really into photography. One summer's afternoon, I decided to take myself on a little hike into the mountains. I rode about an hour on my bike to a really remote location. I brought along some food, a couple of rice balls, and some sausage thing. Yeah, I still remember that. Riding up towards the mountain, I saw many fields, and there were old people working those fields. I felt as if I could leave my bike anywhere and not run the risk of it being stolen. I was happy that I'd chosen to come out here. So I left my bike in a shady area and began heading into the woods. I walked for a short while, and then I saw a dog up ahead. The dog had a thick chain around its neck. The dog wasn't looking at me, so I whistled and the dog stopped. When the dog looked at me, I noticed that it looked a lot like my dog which died a few years ago. It was a mixed breed dog, and I called out to it, "Hey buddy, what are you doing out here with this big old chain around your neck?" I removed the chain from his neck and split my lunch with the dog, who looked super hungry. I thought after we ate we could go our separate ways, but the dog followed me. I turned to the dog and said, "Hey buddy, sorry but that's all the food I have, there's nothing left." The dog just stared at me, and I couldn't help but smile and laugh. The dog just sat there panting and wagging his tail. I patted him on the head and turned to leave, but once again the dog followed. I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe this isn't so bad. It could be fun to have a little company. You coming with me then, boy? I asked the dog and its tail began to wag. The answer was clearly yes. So I headed into the mountain with a dog at my heels. The mountains weren't very big. I thought that I would take about 2 hours in total for this trip. I was climbing the mountain, taking photos of the plants and the views. It was great. It was the height of summer, and the cicadas were in full voice. There were numerous insects buzzing and chirping, the birds singing in the trees. I passed a pair of old men, who also were out for a hike. I greeted one, and they said something like, "Oh, you're with a dog, huh?" This happened when I was about 70% into the hike. I had climbed this mountain several times before. I felt I knew the area quite well. I loved it there. I came across a dirt road that I hadn't seen before when I was near the bottom of the mountain. Beyond the dirt road, there was gravel that extended around the left. I couldn't see where it went without walking down it. I wondered, what's down here? I couldn't believe I hadn't seen this place before. I walked down the dirt road closer to the gravel. There was a rusted wire suspended between two white pillars, which acted as a kind of barrier. I could see a dilapidated cabin back there. It looked like it had been abandoned. Whoa, what a great place to photograph, I thought to myself. I slipped under the rusted wire and onto the gravel path, but stopped when I heard the dog barking like mad behind me. It surprised me so much I turned to face the dog. The dog had its haunches up and was kind of in a defensive position. You know, the one that dogs do when they bark, yeah? The look on the dog's face is one I will never forget. The primal expression of fear and distress. Something had spooked the dog into a fight or flight situation. I should make it clear that the dog wasn't barking at me. It wasn't scared. The dog wasn't going to lunge at me or anything. It was barking at something behind me, barking at the road which I was about to embark down. My back went cold. I noticed something. I couldn't hear the sounds of the cicadas or sounds down the road. I stared down there and felt a cold wind blowing at my back. This is somewhere I shouldn't go, I thought. I hurried back to the mountain path I knew, and the sounds of nature grew louder. I looked around for my companion, but couldn't find the dog anywhere. He had disappeared. I looked for the dog while I went down the mountain. I wanted to say goodbye, maybe even thank you, because I'm certain that if it wasn't for the dog, my curiosity would have got the better of me, and I would have walked off beyond the wire barrier. I wonder what would have happened to me if I did that. Did the dog save me from something? I think it did. I must have looked around the mountain for about an hour and a half trying to find the dog, but it was gone. I was tired and hungry and ready to head home at that point. I said goodbye to the dog out loud, went back a few times to the mountain area but never found the gravel path or the dog again. I love mountains. I love going on mountain hikes and trail walks. I used to go with some friends in a group or even by myself. This experience takes place when I went to a certain mountain for the first time. The day I wanted to climb this summit of the breezy mountain, the conditions were great. It was late summer and the weather was clear and breezy. I had read in a guidebook that there was a temple at the top of the mountain. It had been there for many years apparently, and I thought it would be cool to check it out while I was there. In years gone by there was a chief priest and was subject to visits from people all over, but according to the guidebook in modern days it had fallen into a state of disrepair, perhaps due to the lack of visitors. There used to be a small village in the mountain too, but apparently it was destroyed by a tsunami, which is why the temple was built, to honor those lost villagers, and that there was a memorial up there. When I climb mountain trails, I always keep my eyes open and make sure I am aware of my surroundings. When I was about halfway up that mountain, I did notice a few stone structures which looked like they could have been part of homes. Seeing those destroyed stone walls and the abandoned buildings made me feel a little unpleasant. Those poor people. I managed to make it to the summit quite easily. and there was plenty of natural light left in the day, so I was able to see the temple. It looked abandoned, and thankfully no one had tried to destroy or ruin it, and I was glad it was still intact. The roads leading up to it had grown over a little, but it wasn't that bad. I weaved my way through the weeds and bush along the road. I just wanted to see where it led. About halfway along the road, I noticed that some of the road had been lost due to a landslide. It certainly looked like it was no longer in use. I felt a little sense of unease when I got to that part of the road. I couldn't place the source of my unease, so I tried to ignore it and push on. I struggled through a particularly thick portion of brush, and after climbing a little, I spotted something up ahead in the road. There was a mini-truck. The mini-truck was parked off the side of the road at an angle, as if it was halfway through a U-turn. It had driven up onto the side of a grassy verge. It looked very out of place, especially since I had just spent the morning looking at abandoned buildings and going through the woods. The closer I got to the car, the more I realized there was something wrong with it. I got close enough to see the door wasn't locked. I took note of the license plate. The car itself looked relatively new. There was also some rope in the back of the truck. It didn't look like the truck had been moved for a while. There were no fresh tire marks to indicate a crash, and the grass verge had grown beneath the front two wheels. The truck looked abandoned, but who would abandon a perfectly good truck? Nothing about that was adding up. Nothing until I thought of the possibility of foul play. I was growing more concerned by each passing moment, so I decided enough was enough, and it was time to call the police. I didn't have great signal in the mountains, and I didn't want to stay there anymore, so I thought that I would call the cops from home. When I got on the phone to the police, I told them the license plate number of the truck and about what I witnessed. It was pretty standard stuff. I made a report and hung up. I thought about it for a while. Maybe I should have stayed longer, or maybe I should have tried to call out to someone, but there was just something so off about being near that van in the desolate location. I just had to leave. About a week later, I received a call from the police that were following up on the truck incident. They wanted to tell me that they had found something. I remember during our call, the police officer paused and said to me in a very sober voice, "Before I proceed, I have to ask if you knew what happened to the owner of the car." That really threw me. I was curious. Well, maybe I should say I was curious, but when I asked myself if I wanted to know what happened, I found the answer was no. So I told the officer that I didn't want to know and hung up. "Sorry, but if this ever happens to you, you'll probably understand. There was an atmosphere to that car. There was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't bear the thought of being told that the owner of the car took their life in those woods. Therefore, the mountains that were enshrined in a very sad history became a little sadder to me in the world. It also became a mountain that I will no longer return to. Maybe misery and despair are all just a part of it, and we have to recognize that. But I didn't need to know, and I'm glad of it." I went hiking in the mountains when I was a student. I'm much older now, but this experience has stayed with me, so I felt like this was the perfect place to share it. I had a really strange experience in the mountains during the autumn. I had joined a hiking society in college when I was a fresher, and I joined with about 10 other students from other universities. I went to an all-women university, and the club I joined was all male. They had traversed the mountains many times in the past. Some of them had a ton of experience that I did not. I thought that it would be great to make some friends and learn from these guys. I felt as if I could rely on them in a sense. We all picked a great day to begin our hike. The weather was perfect, the place wasn't too bad either, and I expected to get left in their dust, but I was keeping up with them quite well. I was tired, sure, but keeping pace. We hiked for a few hours, and then we got to the mountain. We had plans to make our campsite and climb the mountain before the sun went down. We took a super short breather, and then we started lunch. It was nice because we all pitched in, and before long our hungry bellies were full. I think everyone was happy with the pace of things and the distraction of dinner, so we kind of wandered off task and were a bit behind schedule. We got back on task after lunch and got ready to climb the mountain, so we split into 2 groups. I was in the second group and wasn't upset about that. I didn't want to be leading the climb. We planned on reaching the summit by 3 p.m. We were supposed to have a break at the summit for half hour, but pretty much as soon as we started climbing, a thick layer of fog began to descend, so we quit taking a break due to the low visibility brought on by the fog. The visibility got worse and worse. Before long, the sun was hidden behind clouds and mist. It was making every step back to the base more difficult, and after about an hour and a half, it was 4:45 p.m. and impossible to walk without the aid of a flashlight. The problem for us was, experienced though I thought my new friends were, they didn't pack any flashlights and neither did I. When we got to the summit, they still insisted on leaving early, but to be completely honest, I was exhausted. Like I said, I wasn't as experienced as these hikers, and I really didn't need that breather. I told them I would be following on right behind them, but I only started heading down the mountain about 5 to 10 minutes after they left. I shouldn't have done that, because even in that short amount of time, I managed to get separated from my group. I took a break and set off assuming I would catch them up, but it was so dark I couldn't hear anyone's voice, and I headed down the mountain in the general direction from where I came, and I guess I was making some progress on the descent. That was when I saw something. There was a light shining off in the distance. The first thought that came to my mind was someone in distress. Maybe someone had gone hiking alone on this dark autumn evening and had gotten lost or stuck. I mean, it was easily done. It had just happened to me. So I called out but received no reply. Perhaps they couldn't hear me. I started to move towards that light, but I wanted to find if someone was hurt or not, and I also wondered if it was someone from the group that had come to help me. I really hoped for the latter. As I got closer, I guessed that the light had been strategically set up for me to follow by someone from my group. I breathed a sigh of relief as I began walking to the light. Someone's voice shouted out to me. I guess it was one of the hikers. "Don't go." I stopped in my tracks. "That light's kinda weird, isn't it?" the guy said. I looked closer at the light and thought that something was wrong. It was sort of hovering and swinging from left to right. Then it moved up and down. That doesn't sound like it's all that strange, but I have to tell you that I knew just by the way the light moved that there wasn't a human operating it. It wasn't a handheld torch. It was going up way too high for it to be handheld. I ignored the light and kept going down the mountain in the direction I heard the voice come from. Before long, I got to the bottom and reached the campsite. I took a quick look back towards the mountain and saw the light had already disappeared. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like it was trying to lead me off the path I was on. Had I followed it, I might not have been here today. It was the strangest thing. This happened one night when I was out in the mountains. I was set to be staying with some friends that I hadn't seen since school. I was invited by a childhood friend, but besides him, everyone else was a stranger. We were set to be staying in a mountain lodge. It was a really nice, pure wooden structure, a log cabin essentially. All of my friends had raved about the lodge before, and I was excited to see if it lived up to the hype. It did. It was a really nice place in the middle of the mountains and pretty rustic. We had plans to go on a hike the following morning. We were supposed to be getting an early night, but we ended up staying up later than expected. I turned the lights off in the lodge in preparation to turn in for the night, and then I heard something strange. This weird, dull noise at the lodge's door. It wasn't very loud. It was barely noticeable. We had left the door open to allow for airflow, but it was a bit weird. To me, it sounded like something sharp hitting a tree. Like those axe-throwing things, but lighter. My friend, who was sort of the leader of our little hiking get-together, was the oldest, and approached the door and pushed it shut and locked it. He didn't say a word, and neither did anyone else in the cabin. No one seemed to be that bothered by the noise, so neither was I, and after everyone went back to their bed, We all went to sleep. When the morning came, I got up to wash my face. It looked like a warm morning, so I opened the door to allow some fresh air into the lodge. I was a bit curious about the noise I heard that night as well. What I saw was pretty freaky. There were loads of these weird fishing hooks jutting out of the door. They had been stabbed into the wood. From each hook was this thick, coarse black thread that trailed off into the distant trees and bush. I couldn't see where they ended. I stood there completely perplexed by what I was seeing, and after a few moments, some of the others in the lodge came downstairs and stood by me in the open cabin door. "Ah, something came down from the mountain last night, huh?" "Maybe there wasn't so much prey in the mountain last night," my hiking friends said when they saw the hooks in the door. It made me feel a bit weird. It felt like I was the only one who really didn't know what was going on. They didn't seem that fazed. After those brief comments, the conversation changed. I couldn't stand it. I had to ask about those hooks. A friend of mine told me that a disturbing woman lived out in the woods, and she uses the hooks to hunt small animals. One of them said that, and pointed at one of the gnarled hooks splintered into the wooden door. He didn't point at the hook though, he pointed at the thread. Well, I thought it was thread at first, but on closer inspection I realized it was human hair. Before we left, one of them got his machete out and pried the hooks out of the door, and then cut the thick rope of hair into pieces. We took those iron fishing hooks back with us down the mountain and threw them in the garbage at the foot of it. It really freaked me out once again, and felt like I was the only one who had found it strange. Nothing else really happened after that. It just seemed as if people were fine with this feral person living out in the mountains, and I decided not to bother hiking the following day. It was just too weird out there. I read about this mountain that's famous for a very odd reason. They say that when you climb this mountain you can hear the laughter of someone. They say that no matter how hard you look for the owner of the laughter, you won't find them. There were lots of rumors about the mountain. Word travels quickly in small villages, and people would constantly try and find the answer to the question of why there was laughter coming from the mountain. Some people speculated that it was a ghost of a small child who passed away somewhere on the mountain that were making the sound of laughter. And the rumors and theories didn't stop there. They spread around the mountain itself. Some villagers said that they were so freaked out by the rumors they wouldn't bring themselves to go anywhere near it. They asked anyone who was brave enough to investigate it and return with an explanation. Word reached a special occult research team at some university, and they were more than willing to investigate. They came with their various machines and were planning on staying night and day until the mystery was finally unraveled. The team researched the mountain thoroughly and arrived back at the village with their findings. They concluded the laughter wasn't created by a spirit, but it wasn't human either. When they found the source, they found that there were many stones in close proximity to the mountain, and that when the wind picked up, it blew through the gaps in the stones, thus producing that eerie laughing sound. The mountain had been that way since ancient times. I imagine that the stones had varied over the years, and if I could remember the name of the mountain, I would have researched it and tried to find more legends. When the university team reported their findings to the villagers, something unexpected happened. The villagers wouldn't believe them. They were certain that the mountain was cursed, and it taunts them with its laughter, claiming the lives it took. Some said the mountain is laughing in warning. The mountain spirits are angry at man's relentless destruction of nature and the environment. When I read that, I got a little shiver for some reason. I guess that was because I used to find the mountains pretty creepy, but I think that people with strong wills and beliefs are a lot creepier. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to J Nightmares for providing these stories and narration. It's very much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more from him, link down below or on screen soon. An extra thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. For signing up, you get bonus content, the likes of which you can find out about in the description. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching. Links on screen for more content. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.